This episode has very sensitive topics, is for mature audiences only, and contains depictions of various forms of trauma. Viewer discretion advised.
For 9 months of my 5-year-old life, I was left on the compound, was there alone. Nobody from my immediate family was there. They came on the weekends, and when they were there, I was not allowed to touch them, hug them, talk to them,
Hmm.
even admit that they were my family. I remember peeing off to the side and it evaporating. So I had to have been sitting there for long periods of time. I was given adult portions to eat. Fatten this kid up because she needs to be fat. That was the theme. I had to be fat. When you reach the point where no more food can go in, what happens to it? It comes out. And then I was forced to eat it. I was
Oh my
forced to eat my
gosh.
vomit. And if I didn't eat it by myself, I was held down by adults and the spoon was forced into my mouth. And I
Oh.
can feel as my jaw was clenched shut, I can still feel the spoon being pressed into my teeth. So if you can imagine a child crying, they have to breathe too. So when I was breathing, then I was alternately swallowing. The torture was because this was the Lord's food that I was vomiting.
The Lord being Rama.
Ultimately, yeah, I got another punishment. And my punishment was he took me into the back with the cattle prod and started just zapping me with this cattle prod and grabbed it and held it and wouldn't let him zap me with it anymore and gained my composure and stood up, like faced him. I had had enough.
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you'd like to see our faces, we would love it if you would go to our YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness, where you can actually interact with the posts, tell the algorithm that you like what we're doing here and you want to become an advocate by subscribing, commenting, liking, all the YouTube things. It really does make a difference, guys, and we so appreciate those words of encouragement for our guests who are coming on, being brave, sharing their stories. They are real people. So today's guest, she reached out through our Jot form. If you're ever interested in sharing your story, you can fill that out in our About section. We love seeing those come in. She was one of them because we are currently covering the cult in Shawano, Wisconsin, which is run by a man from India who came over, kind of created his own doctrine, was some kind of brand of Christianity. We'll get into all of that stuff to get more specific. But just to bring her on, thank you so much for joining us, Michele Kemp.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so I forgot to ask you, do you know the people who came on previously, Martha and Elizabeth?
I do. I do. I
Okay.
do. Wonderful people.
Wow. Okay, so I was wondering if you saw it and then decided to submit, or if you would talk to them and they're like, oh, you should reach out to her.
Both actually.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Well, we're happy to have you here. And your story specifically, I definitely wanted to share because you were in for a longer period of time. You experienced the cult as an adult as well as a child, and that's a perspective we haven't quite yet gotten to. And so I'm happy that you decided to share your story. So I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the cult leader himself, kind of where he came from and how he began.
So most people have already covered this, that he came from India and he was born in Hindu and all of that. My father met him when Rama came to Stewartville, Minnesota, which is just a little bit out of Rochester. My dad was an associate pastor at a church called The Center. And as places do, they have other people come and speak. And that's how my father met him. And Rama roped my father in by saying that my dad and another member would be Rama's associate pastors. So Rama built this whole thing by saying, like, making it seem as if it was going to be a church.
Mm.
And then my dad became one of the quote elders who brought more and more people in. Backed, Backing up a little bit, Rama came on a scholarship to study engineering, nuclear engineering at the Columbia University in New York City. And he suffered from culture shock and was writing a letter to his father, telling his father that he couldn't hack it here in the United States. And as he was writing the letter is when he claims this, he had this conversion experience, like similar to what Paul experienced on the road to Damascus, where he had this golden light and this being said to him, Rama, why do you fight against me? Follow me and I will be with you all the days of your life. I am Jesus Christ. And that is the story that I heard from the time I was born until he stopped believing in Jesus Christ.
Wow, that's quite the flip.
Yeah.
And I know I know that happened later in your story. I'm sure that was like a rug pull for everybody. Hold on, wait a second. Isn't this the whole thing that the religion was founded on was Jesus Christ? It's funny because it sounds so much like Joseph Smith. I think I mentioned this in the interview with Martha, where I was like, that's the Joseph Smith story, where he's like so troubled and doesn't know what to do, and then a light comes down, and then Jesus and God, he claims there were two beings, came to him. Well, it depends on what version you read, but came to him and said, you have to start your own church and the one true church. And so that's really interesting. That seems like he's kind of pulling from that playbook a little bit.
Here's the thing. L. Ron Hubbard, who started Scientology, said, if you want to be rich, start a religion.
Yeah.
And that's just what they did.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of your story as well.
Yeah.
So, okay, you were born into this then. Your dad is a high-ranking member. So let's talk a little bit about your childhood. How close in proximity were you to the compound in Wisconsin?
So I grew up in Rochester. That was our main where we mainly grew up. I went to school from first to about fourth grade, and then I was pulled out of school in the middle of fourth grade because my oldest sister, who had left, had been coming to see me. And it was found out that she had been coming to visit me. And so then I was pulled out of school. And a lot of the other brother's kids were also pulled out of school at the same time. And we were all homeschooled then after that. And I was blamed for that whole situation.
Oh, wow.
So even though the secretary and the principal and my adult sister all had something to do with organizing that whole thing, I was 10 years old and Rama came down really hard on me, and I was segregated from the congregation for several months after that and had to sit by myself and not have anything to eat and didn't have. I remember peeing off to the side and it evaporating. So I had to have been sitting there for long periods of time
Oh my gosh.
because at 10 years old, I had participated in visiting my sister, who I missed so and loved so very much.
Yeah, that's awful. How many siblings did you have, or do you have?
I'm one of seven now.
Okay, and where do you fit in the lineup?
I'm number three, but I'm the oldest in many ways. The older two are many years older than me. So I was actually the oldest child born into the cult after the no birth control rule was handed down to the brethren. So after that, then I was the first child born.
Okay. Wow. Let's get into, I know you wanted to talk about when you were 5 and
Mm.
how traumatic that was for you.
So when I was 5, I don't remember all of that conversation, but Rama decided that I was a bad girl. And because of that, and for my salvation, my parents needed to leave me at the compound in Shawano. I was 5. What are 5-year-olds doing? They're getting ready for kindergarten. They're going to kindergarten. That's what a 5-year-old is doing. And for 9 months of my 5-year-old life, I was left on the compound and I was there alone. Nobody from my immediate family was there. They came on the weekends and then they went home. And when they were there, I was not allowed to touch them, hug them, talk to them,
Hmm.
even admit that they were my family. In my mind, I knew they were my family and I could watch them walk by and I said to myself that they were my family, but I couldn't at all have anything to do with them. And I have a vivid memory where I saw my dad across the way, like all the cars were parked in the field next to the chicken coop. And I remember seeing my dad at the Cadillac. We had a Cadillac then. and something came over me and I just ran from where I was. I ran down the stairs, up and over and all whatever. And when he saw me coming, I think I expected him to like smile and be happy that I was there, that I was coming, but I didn't get that. He just pointed with his finger from me to the house and said, "No, get going. You got to get going."
Mm,
And so I just diverted my feet. I didn't even get all the way to him. I just ran to where he said, "No, you can't come here. Go, go." And I just diverted my feet and began running towards the house. And I felt in that moment something snap in me. And looking back, it was that feeling of I'm alone. Nobody has my back. I only have my own back.
mm,
And I was 5. And that picture or that moment, that film, that video, whatever it is, has played in my mind over and over throughout the years as the beginning moment of my abandonment issues.
yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective now, why your dad may have reacted that way? Why he may have been afraid if you would have actually made it to him?
Because if anybody would have seen him coddling me, giving me hugs, picking me up, or anything like that, he would have been eviscerated. He would have been publicly humiliated. His life would have been hell. So he couldn't have done that. As but as a little girl, I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
So the effect on me was different, but as an adult, I understand his reaction.
Do you have any memories what it was like living there as a 5-year-old?
Mhm.
Because talking to Martha, she was saying they weren't given any beds. It was just concrete in a sleeping bag. Is that what you experienced?
So this was in 1980. So this was pretty early on, earlier in the cult, and I got to sleep on carpet. I had a sleeping bag and I got to sleep on carpet. So that was like the royalty treatment. But I did sleep on the floor, and for most of the time that I was there, I mean, I never slept on a bed. I don't think any of us ever slept on a bed.
Mm,
But I slept on the floor and I slept on a carpet. That was the royalty treatment. Throughout the years, as time went on, things got worse and you slept on cement. But when I was a little girl, I got to sleep on carpet.
okay.
But the things that were bad were I was given adult portions to eat. I was I come from a family where we are like real skinny individuals and we aren't and when we're under stress we don't eat. We're just those kinds of people. And I was under constant stress, so I didn't want to eat. But let's fatten this kid up because she needs to be fat. That was the theme. I had to be fat. So they gave me adult portions that I had to eat. Well, when you reach the point where no more food can go in, what happens to it? It comes out. And then I was forced to eat it. I was
Oh my
forced to eat my
gosh.
vomit. And if I didn't eat it by myself, I was held down by adults and the spoon was forced into my mouth. And I
Oh,
can feel, as I'm talking, can feel the spoon. As my jaw was clenched shut, I can still feel the spoon being pressed into my teeth until it felt like the teeth were going to break, but I was also crying. So if you can imagine a child crying, they have to breathe too. So when you're breathing, you can't like not, you have to swallow or breathe. So when I was breathing, then I was alternately swallowing. So eventually, after several times of this, I just learned to ask for water or juice, and I would just shoot the vomit myself and quickly drink water or something.
oh
What a
my
champ, huh?
gosh.
I mean, what's worse than shooting your own vomit?
Why did they make you do that? Was it just like a,
It's just a torture.
yeah.
Just a
What
torture.
what was the reason they told, or did they tell you why you had to do that?
No.
They were just being horrible human beings.
I think it's just because I think it was the premise behind it and the reason the brethren partook in the torture was because this was the Lord's food that I was vomiting.
The Lord being Rama.
Ultimately, yeah. But this was food that was prepared from his upstairs.
Mm,
Like I didn't just eat with the brethren. I ate food from his upstairs where like his family ate.
wow.
And then I was vomiting it. But the whole idea was that I had this rebellious spirit. And so this rebellious spirit was what was making me vomit.
Oh,
Not the fact that they were forcing me to eat this food. And the most interesting thing is that Rama comes from the Indian culture where he comes from. I've been told this by other Indian people that back in those days, I don't think it's that way anymore, but back in those days, it was very common to force feed young girls because it put them into puberty and then made them more beautiful or more marital material. And there are things that happened to me after that I'm not free yet. I don't want to talk about yet, but it makes me really realize that I was being groomed as like,
oh,
if you get my drift,
yeah.
because I really did put on a lot of weight because I was being force fed. So force feeding is just another form of torture as so it the opposite of being starved.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry you went through that. How old were you when this happened?
I was 5.
You were that young.
I was 5. Hmm.
Wow. That's so awful. And some of the things that I've heard that Rama did to these children is so despicable and disgusting and sadistic and wrong that it's just, I, I don't know how you were able to survive it. It's just, it's so much to handle.
Well, I have one of those spirits that you can't break. And I think from the time I was little, he was out to break me. I have heard stories of when I was 3, like before I could even talk, he was tormenting me with, your parents are going to leave you here. And I would just crumple to the floor, like
Mm,
as a baby would do, just crumple to the floor and scream. And he would laugh. And the brethren around him would laugh. Everybody would laugh like it was a joke. And then years and years and years later, I would have this recurring nightmare that happened to me all the time, where it was this faceless child and faceless people, and this child was being tortured and people laughing. Just this like awful cackling, awful laughing with singing in the background. And I couldn't understand what this was, couldn't remember it. And then I happened to be talking to somebody who had been a teenager at that time. And this person told me that it was because from the time I was very small, Rama was tormenting me with my parents were going to leave me. And then eventually my parents did leave me when I was 5. So that's where that nightmare came from.
yeah. It's so common, and it just goes to show how much the body can hold on to traumas and just keep it in your
Mhm.
subconscious until you can get it out, process it, do something with it, recognize it. Wow. So, is there anything that you wanted to talk about? Anything else about your childhood there?
I think another thing I want to just say was that the programming, they call it brainwashing. I call it programming. It's like a computer program that is stuck into you from the time you were born. And for a lot of us, like for me, I was taught that I was worthless. I was taught my sister was better than me. I was told that I was born with a plastic spoon in my mouth and she was born with a gold spoon in her mouth. And I would never amount to anything and she would amount to something. We were constantly pitted against each other.
Mm,
And so for the remainder of my life, I believed that. It's just something that sits in the back of your mind and you just subconsciously fulfill it, maybe. And so, like, the partners I chose, the choices I made in my life, it all fulfilled that. Well, I'm worthless, well, that's what I get. I sinned.
Yeah, this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hmm. And then further than that, it taught people how to treat me. It taught people that Michelle's always wrong. Michelle's the one that's, the bad seed. And then instead of me standing up for myself, I just brushed it under the rug because it's not a big deal because Michelle's worthless. It's just this loop that happens all the time in your head. It happens with other people. Yeah.
And did he do this to a lot of people as far as you were aware?
Yes, it was common. It was very common.
Yeah.
It didn't help that my older siblings left and then went to the authorities to talk about the abuse. My older brother had been threatened to be killed, and he finally went to the authorities and didn't want to be threatened anymore. And it became a big case. My parents were charged with neglect, and in our county, he was taken from them, and he refused to go back home and all of that. So then my older two siblings were eviscerated and told that they were the devils and they were Judas and those kind of things. And so all of us that were left, we were in it's a programming where it's not happening specifically to you, but it's happening in front of your eyes and it's happening within your earshot to teach you a lesson that it can't happen. You can't do that. Oh, this is what's going to happen to you. And then Rama would say that I was going to be 10 times worse than my sister in an effort to make me really purpose. No, brother, no, brother. I'm never, ever going to be like that. No, I would never be like that. And now that I'm speaking out, it looks to those that are still there like he saw the future. You see what I'm saying? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
he saw the future. He saw that she was going to be like that. When really in reality I was one of his worst enemies. He didn't pick on me just because I was this meek little kid who he could control. I was one of those kids. I'm going to tell you a story. We had these huge floodlights at the compound, and the floodlights attracted these huge June bugs that are like that big, those huge honking things that are horrible. They buzz in your hair, and their legs get stuck in your hair, and they're awful.
Ugh.
And he would make a contest to see who could eat them.
Oh.
And when I was 5, there was another kid there that was stuck there who was 8, and he made us eat them or would try to eat them or whatever. And the boy did it after several tries. He finally did it, but I couldn't, and I didn't, and I was in my mind having this dialogue. Well, I'll take the one that's not moving. Well, then by the time you pick up the one that's moving, it's moving. And I was telling myself, maybe just get the legs past your tongue. Like, I'm 5 and I'm having this dialogue in my head, right? Or then the beetle would drop. And so then I would get shocked with the cattle prod because I wasn't eating the beetle. At one point, he went to shock me and I backed up and I fell. So then I was scooting backwards, trying to like get away. And just out of sheer desperation, I just screamed, I'm telling my dad. That evening, what I had fallen asleep and he came in to where I was sleeping with the cattle prod and was zapping me and whatever. And I was like, I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry, brother. I wasn't even sure what I was sorry for, but I'm sorry, brother. And he said, you're never telling your dad, are you? I said, no, brother. I'm sorry, brother. No, brother.
Uh,
That's the kind of psychological abuse.
yeah.
And I was 5.
Did you ever tell your parents?
No, 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 no.
So, from what I'm gathering in other interviews as well, is most parents had no idea the type of torture that Rama was imposing on them.
Well, here's the thing. The day that was happening, where I was being forced to eat that, there were other parents there. My own parents may not have been there, but there were other parents there.
Wow.
So I can't believe for 1 minute that parents didn't know that this was going on. I know that my mother saw things happen to other children. She may not have seen it happen to me, but she saw it happen to other children. And both of my parents heard what happened to my older brother. So at the very least, they knew they were leaving us in an environment where the high probability of us being tortured and abused was very high.
Wow.
So I don't believe for 1 minute that they didn't know. They knew that something was happening. They may not have known specifics. I'll give them that. They didn't know specifics, but they knew that children were being abused. They knew children were being tortured. They knew children were being trafficked for labor. Children were being flown over to India. What is that? That's trafficking. I was a trafficked child simply because I was being forced to work against my will.
Right. Do you want to talk about that?
I remember one time we built anything that happened on that compound, any to make that compound bigger, to make Rama's house bigger, we all did it. Digging, planting trees, watering the trees. And when you say watering the trees, we didn't just water them with hoses. No, we all gathered together 5-gallon buckets. We went to the pond, and then we had this trail of children, long skirts. Our skirts were sopping wet by the end of the day because you're sloshing the water around in the buckets. And we had to carry them a mile, or I'm guessing a mile, to where the trees were. We didn't get it. It wasn't just easy labor. It was hard manual labor. And we could pour a foundation for something or pour the cement for something that was going to happen. Half a year later, he wasn't happy with it, and we had to jackhammer it. And then what we had to do was all of us kids, our job was to haul all the jagged, sharp rocks with the rod hanging out of it to some place and dump it. We were constantly doing things, pulling weeds, hauling brush, starting fire to the brush pile. Like, we were constantly picking up pine cones, picking rock. When we put in the septic system at Rama's house, they could only dig as far as they could possibly dig because of wires or, lines or whatever. Then the rest of it had to be dug by hand. So we're down in the mud. Our boots only go to our knees, and so mud fills your boots. But you're digging. You're just digging, digging, digging. Did you think I wanted to spend my weekend doing that? No. That's child labor.
Mm-hmm.
That's trafficking. That's trafficking by definition.
Wow. So when you were pulled out of school, how did you feel as a child? Is that something that you really missed? Were you happy not to go to school? What was your life change like at that time?
For me, I hated public school because I was tormented there too. I was not treated like a peer.
Mm,
I was ostracized and treated horribly there because of the way we looked.
right.
And then I did things that weren't like other kids, like prayed before I ate my lunch. Like, I was told I had to pray before I ate my lunch. So I would get down on the floor and pray before I ate my lunch. Well, then that got me more ridicule. So eventually I would stop praying, and I would just at my where I was sitting pray. I remember one time at the end of the school year, my sister and I were on the school bus, and we were in front of our house. The bus was stopped in front of our house, and the kids from the Catholic school, I'm only saying it's the Catholic school because that was the school they were all from. That was the last kids on the bus. They would not let us off the bus because they all had brought like super soakers on the bus and filled them with soap water. And they were squirting us because they said we needed showers because we wore the same clothes every day.
Oh,
We didn't wear the same clothes every day. They just looked like it to them because we didn't wear cartoons or, whatever. But the bus driver finally had to get out of his seat and physically help us extricate ourselves from the bus so that we could get off the bus. So no, going to public school was not fun for me either.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably really harmed how I left, even. Like, I didn't really have anybody to turn to even leave the cult because there was nobody on the outside that was friendly either.
Right. Did you receive any sort of support from your teachers? Did they notice something was off about behavior or maybe signs of abuse?
No, not one teacher asked, not one administrator asked, nobody filed any reports. No.
That's so frustrating. So then when you left public school, did it feel like a little bit of a relief at first?
Yes. Yeah. I think it was a relief.
Yeah. And then did it continue to feel that way? Were you excited with homeschool or did you enjoy homeschool or what was the curriculum like that you were receiving?
Initially, I and I think my younger sister, we joined correspondence school, and I went to Christian Liberty Academy and then American School in Baltimore, from Baltimore, where my dad paid tuition, and then they sent a box that had all of the supplies and the teachers' guides and everything in it. And supposedly, then your teachers is your mom.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that so many of us then went to American school, and many of us were like in the same grade, but at different stages. So I remember sharing tests. Like we would take the test and send it in to be corrected, and then they'd send the test back. And then so when tests were sent back, we just shared them.
Yeah.
We didn't really get a solid, good, great education for for those of us that for our formal years. I don't believe. It's that when I went to college, I had to retake so many classes over again that I should have been able to succeed in.
Right. Is that how it was for your teen years as well?
That was my teen years.
Okay.
I did Christian Liberty Academy, I think for 2 years, and then American School. So American School was my teen years,
Okay.
and then I went back to public school in 11th grade.
What was that like? That must have been a little bit of a shock.
That was a culture shock.
Yeah.
I really tried to fit in and did stupid things like roll my skirts up at the waist to try to make them short. And really, I just made myself look like an idiot. I cut my hair, but my hair had been down to my knees and I cut it to my waist. And I mean, I thought, boy, that's really short. No, it wasn't that short, but I thought it was so short. But
You're not allowed to cut your hair, right?
no, no, we weren't. And what I thought it was that short, but I couldn't cut it anymore because I still had to wear it up in a bun. So I couldn't cut anymore. But I did meet a couple, one or two people who were became good friends, and they're still friends today that befriended me and took me as I was.
Hmm.
My first boyfriend outside of the cult met me and became my boyfriend when I was still wearing skirts. And when I transitioned to wearing pants, he never even asked. He never was like, "What's up with that? Why are you?" Nope, never asked. He was just like, "Oh, well, that must just what she's doing." He never asked, never judged, never anything. I just love him for that.
Yeah.
Like there are such great people in this world. I'm telling you. You just have to find them.
Yeah, so what was it for you that got you to want to leave? Because you left when you physically left when you were 18, right?
Yeah, I did. I finally left because I had wanted to get married. So a lot of people talk about how Rama set up marriages with people they didn't want to get married to.
Mm-hmm.
And my story is a little bit different because I so desperately wanted to get married. And I wanted to get married because this man and I were so close. We were like kindred spirits from the time we were in diapers. And we had been friends, quietly friends. And we wanted to get married, and Rama just wouldn't let us. And then Rama would say things like on the weekends, he would say, I'm going to just say his name is Dan. It's not his name, but I'm going to say his name is Dan. he would pick out something about me and like say, he would say, Michelle's a liar, right, Dan? You don't want a woman like that. She'll cheat on you and leave you when you're working. And what's he supposed to say except, yes, brother? So that kind of stuff was happening all the time, constantly happening. And little by little, it started just eating at me. And one weekend, it happened again after I turned 18 in July, and this was like the beginning of August. This happened again. And I was in the middle of the meeting, and I just put my head down in like a praying position, put my head down. And Rama told me to put my head up, and I wouldn't do it. And that was like the first time I rebelled openly and refused to put my head up. And there was other girls around me and other brothers' wives were like forcibly trying to make me put my head up, and I wouldn't put my head up. And finally, Rama just said, leave her alone. And that was the last weekend I came. The next weekend, I told my mom I had to work on a Friday. When she dropped me off, I called her from work, and oh, it's gonna make me cry. Um, because when you decide you have to leave, you have to make yourself really callous to what's going to happen. You know that your family is going to be disappointed. You know that there's going to be emotion involved, and you just have to really make yourself callous.
Mm-hmm.
But I called my mom, and she said, "When are you going to be done with work?" And I said, "Well, I don't really have to work. I'm just not going anymore." She's like, "Michelle, no, you can't do this." And I think she said something about hell, and I just hung up the phone on her. And all these years later, that bothers me because I can still hear her voice and how pained she felt. Because I'm sure that she felt that really deeply, but I had to do this for myself. It was like an act of survival. And I hung up the phone and I went and found my dad. My dad had left already. And I found him at the fair because he was selling Britannicas at the fair. And I found him and I just said, I'm not going anymore. And he didn't have he just had an indifferent reaction. He didn't have a joyful or any reaction. And
Huh.
my parents were still married at the time and lived in the same house. And obviously, I still had younger brothers and sisters. So I stayed with my dad until his Britannica booth was closed. And then I went home with them. And when I went home, my mom was gone. It was just shortly after that that Rama told my mom to stop bringing my other siblings then because he told my mom that they were just spies for my dad. So then my younger siblings no longer were going anymore after that. Because I'm sure in his mind, if you can't keep them, just make up some story about them, right? They're just spies now. Rama could not forcibly bring anybody into my dad's house to physically come get me because my dad lived there, right? And my dad no longer was going to the cult anymore. So Rama knew he could not go up against my dad. My dad would have called the police and had any of those people arrested.
Mm-hmm.
So because Rama knew all of that, instead of pushing his luck and going against my dad, he just said, "Oh, let him have them all. They're just spies for him anyway."
How did your siblings feel? Were they relieved that they didn't have to go back?
Yep. The younger one. Yep. They were relieved.
So, how was your mom taking this then? If she felt like your salvation depended on being a part of this church and then she was essentially kicked out with her whole family, how did she take it?
She wasn't kicked out, just the kids were.
Okay, so she was still required to go on the weekends?
Yep. So she still went. But all along in our life, Rama blamed everything on my dad. If us kids were bad, it was all because of my dad. It was never because of my mom. So my mom was always the good one. She was the one that was because she ratted us out. She ratted us out to Rama. She ratted my dad out to Rama. And so because she was in Rama's good graces, he wanted to keep her. So he kept her.
Mm.
But he allowed her to still remain living at my dad's house. And so she would live at my dad's house, and then some of the brethren would come pick her up and take her to the meetings, take her to the weekends. You know, that's how she lived her life for many, many years.
It's interesting that she would be willing to leave all of her children for that long, for a few days.
Well, she left me and Shawano for 9 months
Right.
when I was 5,
Yeah.
and she has nothing to do with any of her 7 children now.
Wow, I just can't imagine. I mean, I can partially understand because I know brainwashing and mind control is very real and it can make people do crazy things. But as a mom now, I just can't imagine being at that point where I just leave 7 children whom I birthed to go to this very abusive place. But, it's all part of the brainwashing and manipulation.
I have a friend who told me that nobody would ever ask me or tell me to do that to my children because everybody knows I would never listen.
Hmm.
There's not one person on the face of this earth that would ever tell me, stop talking to your children. You can't have anything to do with your children. And then I would listen. I would give them the middle finger and I would have a relationship with my children.
Hmm.
I cannot fathom it.
Yeah. It seems like he really preyed on people's weaknesses and exploited those and knew the things to say to get them to stay or to do his bidding.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
What were some of the things, just for context, I'm curious, what were some of the things that she would rat on you about? Like, what was she telling Rama?
So when I don't know, I think I was probably 12. Rama would have, so he had this big bulldozer, and every time it would go out, like his boots, every time it went out, he wanted the bulldozer cleaned. Now, he never taught us, any of us kids, how to clean the bulldozer. He just said, clean the bulldozer. So there was a whole bunch of us paper towel girls who had boxes of stuff that we would bring, boxes and bags of stuff, paper towels, soap, toothpicks, those little tiny broom and dustpans, what have you, anything that we could think of, flashlights, whatever. So the paper towel girls would get all of their stuff out and share it amongst all the other 100 kids and to clean this bulldozer. A bulldozer is a big freaking piece of equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were at it for hours. And then a couple hours later, he came to check on our progress and noticed that on one side of the bulldozer, the lettering had been taken off. And then he flew into a rage and wanted to know who had taken the lettering off the bulldozer. Well, nobody fessed up. And I was standing on the other side of the bulldozer where I had been working. And nobody fessed up. So he rubbed the side of the bulldozer that where the lettering had come off, and he smelled it. And it smelled like the soap that I had brought. So guess who got blamed for the lettering coming off the bulldozer?
Wow.
I did.
So that was you. Martha talked about this in her book. So you were the child who was punished for that.
Yeah. That was me.
Wow.
And when my mother came to get me, she asked me, "How come you lied to brother?" I was like, "I didn't lie to brother. First of all, I hadn't even opened my mouth because I didn't do it, so I didn't lie. And I didn't lie because I didn't do it."
Yeah.
So she went and told Rama that I lied. Oh, I was 13. And so because I had said I didn't do it, I got another punishment. And my punishment was he took me into the back with the cattle prod and started just zapping me with this cattle prod. And I had enough when I don't know, I think I was kind of on the floor, but I went to kind of grab the the head of it where he was zapping me, and and grabbed it and held it and wouldn't let him zap me with it anymore, and gained my composure and stood up, and I just faced and like squared off, faced him, and had my hands behind my back with my two middle fingers up. Where I learned that your two middle fingers were what they meant, I have no idea where I learned that, but I was 13. That was, I think, when he realized it was just a matter of time before his hold on me was up.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that as a real defining moment as well. I was very defiant in that. But that's just one incident. My mom turned me over to him. It was my mom. My mom didn't believe me one bit. That's just that's just an instant.
Yeah. Wow. So when you left then, and you were kind of responsible of all of her children being kicked out, did she punish you at home in any way?
No, because our parents didn't have control over us. Just because our parents were our parents doesn't mean they had control over us. So our parents weren't allowed to parent us. Into my teen years, I would get up in the morning and get on my bike, not my bike, but the neighbor's bike, and I'd ride across town to meet with the other brother's kids that lived across town. And Rama knew I was doing it because my mom ratted us out. And so then Rama would call and ask me what I was doing, and I was honest. I told him what we were doing and who I was hanging out with, and we didn't get in trouble. So what does that tell you? Tells you it's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So our parents had no say. Rama was the one that parented us or didn't parent, whichever, however you want to look at it. So when we left the cult, that didn't just magically happen again. My parents didn't just magically get their powers to parent the children again. My siblings had been used to my parents not parenting. So they ran amok and did whatever the heck they wanted.
Oh
So
boy.
parenting fell on me. So I've been parenting children since I was 10.
Ooh.
Since my little sister was born, I've been parenting kids. And Rama bred us older kids that it was our job and our responsibility to raise them, because we had to listen to brother and we had to raise them in the ways of the Lord because our parents weren't following the ways of the Lord. So it was our job. And like before every Saturday and Sunday meeting, Rama would take all of the older boys and girls and would parade us around, and we'd have to pray with him without the parents, without the little kids. And it was this like good old boys club where he was trying to like indoctrinate us into his way of thinking, or whatever, and part of all of that indoctrination was raising our younger siblings, and we had to teach them how to behave and how to be, and if they messed up it was on us.
Oh.
Not only was it on our parents, but it was on us. So when we left the cult, it very much weighed on me that my siblings do good and be good, because my mom was still in the cult and I didn't want to lose a relationship with her. So I was caught in this pressure cooker. Like I wanted to live my life and I wanted to do what I wanted to do and I wanted to get married and I wanted to have my kids and whatever. But I still had these children on this other side who still needed me and I still needed to raise them. And my mom would say to me, "You better call brother and ask brother." I don't know, like things I wanted to do, and I would decide whether I would call or not. And I did. I would call brother Rama and I would ask him. And there were things that would happen in my life. Like I got pregnant with my first daughter before I was married. And my mom's like, "You better call and tell brother." So I did. And the first thing he said to me? First thing he said to me was it with a black guy?
What?
That was the first thing he said to me. The second thing he said to me was, "You should have used a rubber." And I thought to myself, what the heck is a rubber?
Oh.
I don't know what a rubber was. And he was the most racist guy when we were growing up, was the most racist guy we ever knew. If any of us have any racist thoughts, we got it from him. And then it's just so hilarious that he's the one that pulls the racist card whenever things don't go his way or in court documents or whatever. He pulls the racist card.
Mm.
That was, yeah. So my mom would tell me, call brother, you better ask brother, whatever. So I was constantly calling brother about how to handle my siblings. Eventually, one of them was living with me.
So how did that all play out then? So you leave the cult, but you're still kind of in because you don't want to lose your connection with your mom, but you still have to raise your children according to what Rama wants. So were you feeling any sort of freedom? Were you allowed to do things that you never did before, or were you still pretty much acting as if you were in the cult?
So I lived on what I call the fence. So on one side, I still very much believed in Rama. I still believed that he was a man of God. I still believed that he held the key to my salvation.
Wow, okay.
But I also wanted to live my own life. So I felt that if I didn't piss him off, that I would still be okay. I thought that if I didn't make him angry, I wouldn't go to hell. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I got married. I picked my own husband outside of the cult, got married. That was horrible. That was disastrous. And when I called Rama to talk about it, he said, well, you shouldn't have married him. It wasn't soothing. It wasn't helpful. It was just like,
Yeah,
well, you were wise in your own
chastising.
eyes and you did what you, blah, blah. Yeah, it was just very, you did what you wanted to do. And he was a serial cheater and he was abusive. He wasn't physically abusive, but he's abusive in all the other ways. And I kept asking if I could get divorced, and he never would let me get divorced. He would say, no, you just have to pray. And he would tell me that I would have to pray a certain way. I can't remember now what the words are, but I faithfully would pray those words every night in hopes that God would tell Rama that I could divorce him.
He is just so sadistic. It's like he enjoyed that you were being tortured.
Of course. Yeah. And throughout my whole life, I'd struggled with suicidal ideations where, because he had told me I was worthless. So I had to do things like I had to plan my life. I had to plan. I'm going to go to work and I'm going to work and then I'll think about it later. And then I'd come home from work and I would think, okay, I have to get my kids off to school and then I'm going to go to bed and then I'll think about it later. Like that's how I had to live my life for a lot of my life, step by step by step, just trying to not unalive myself.
Mm.
But really, the reason I never did was because when it came down to it, I didn't want to leave my kids. So really, they're the reason I never did. I didn't want to leave them. Just the magnitude of constantly fighting that is exhausting. Constantly fighting that is hard.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of empathy for people who do.
Did you have any awareness that there was help that you could seek out? I know that they demonize medical care. Did they also demonize mental health?
They very much did demonize mental health, but no, I didn't know. I had therapy. I had a lot of therapy as a as somebody that was older, but I never told anybody that I was suicidal because after my divorce, I was afraid of losing my children.
Right.
So I never told anybody. And I just lived with it and just dealt with it.
Yeah. Wow, that's such a heavy burden that you had to carry around. And I imagine it's just this culmination of everything you went through as a child and a young adult. And here you are in an abusive situation with children, and you're just trying to also figure out how to parent probably differently, right? Because you haven't had that healthy parenting modeled to you. What was that like becoming a mom and trying to know the best way to handle having children?
Oh, I've had so much guilt. Um, I've had a lot of guilt raising the first. one or two of my kids, but they say when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
And I've just sort of lived by that motto. I've always been really strict with my kids, but I have to give myself grace because I didn't know any better. That's, I mean, I didn't beat them. I wasn't sadistic. I wasn't like the things that I did for my kids was to make sure that they had a good life. So I have to give myself grace. I didn't beat them. I didn't, you know what I mean? I didn't do to them what was done to me, but I definitely was hard on them, and being hard on them came from my background.
Mm.
But I see how they are now as adults, and I see the fruits of my labor, and I'm very proud of them. So I must not have done too bad.
Yeah. Well, like you said, you just got to give yourself grace. I mean, growing up in that type of environment is hard for anyone. And then to really know truly the best way to parent after that when you're still dealing with your own traumas, unresolved traumas as well, those programs, like we talked about in the beginning, that run in the background. And I think that's what people don't often realize because we can make conscious decisions, but that is only half of it because when you have these unconscious programs running in the background, telling yourself, like, oh, I'm worthless, or this is what I deserve, or whatever it is that you were programmed into as a child, that's still that underlying programming really informs your choices moving forward. And so it's so hard to break those cycles. We have someone, shout out, who always types in break the silence, break the cycle. Thank you for always doing that on our posts. But it's true, it takes a lot of work to get to that point where you can successfully break that cycle. But yeah, therapy, right?
Yeah. In 2012, I finally found a therapist who diagnosed me properly. I had always been just treated for depression and anxiety. And in 2012, I finally found a therapist who is a Vietnam veteran himself. And he right away pinpointed that I had PTSD.
Mm,
And he said it, he's like, you don't have just a run of the mill case. He's like, you have a really severe, unique case. And he actually is from this area and he remembers when the kidnappings happened. So when I was like 3 years old, a couple of women were kidnapped from the cult that I'm from and by their parents in an attempt to deprogram them. And um, it was made the news. It was a big deal, whatever. Anyways, my therapist knows about that, remembers that, and he's done a lot of work with other cults and he's done a lot of work with veterans. So he has been an advocate for me. He's really fought for me to get well and to get better. And what they had to do for me was provide like a treatment like a treatment plan that was just for me. Because the problem is that children who are born into like cults like this or other traumatic situations, when you get out and you're trying to find a therapist, there are so many that aren't versed in this kind of trauma
yeah,
that they can't help you.
yeah.
And that's what I found. Like I went to an outpatient program for 12 weeks to try to get my head screwed on, for lack of a better way to say it. And was just thrown into a class with other people like veterans and, other people that had been in other kinds of trauma. And not to negate their trauma at all, but the therapies were aimed at getting us to a before. Well, I was born into my trauma. There's no way you can get me to a before. So for me, it was just a waste of time. And in order to help people like me, you have to have specialized treatment plans. And they have to be specialized toward to that person.
Mm.
So a lot of mine was like journaling.
That's great. I don't know if we've really dove into PTSD on this channel. Are you comfortable talking about some of the symptoms you experienced? I feel like for people watching who may have something similar, it would be really helpful.
Sure. So I went a majority of my life not having any symptoms because I refused to think or talk about the cult. But beyond that, I had dissociative amnesia, and that prevents you from recollecting all of the trauma. It's your brain's way of protecting you because you're just not in a space
Mm,
to be able to process it. So the brain just says, forget it. You're just not gonna remember. Well, then once my children began growing up and they didn't need me to be busy all the time, that's when I started having nightmares. And
mm,
so my PTSD started manifesting as like the triggers would set off these horrible nightmares and these horrible flashbacks. And the people in them were all faceless. I would wake up in the middle of the night and have peed the bed, or I would have vomited in my sleep.
mm.
And my throat would be hoarse because I had screamed so loud. Like it was as if my body had to process this trauma in whatever way possible. And it was just letting go. Like I just had no control over my body.
Yeah.
I finally had to I put cameras on me when I was sleeping to video record just to show my doctors what was going on while I was sleeping. I was not a fun person to be around because everything triggered me. Everything, like something just little that anybody would say would spark a flashback. And then, of course, I'd be snappy and I'd be angry. And, I wasn't a fun person to be around. Like, who wants to be around somebody that's constantly feeling that? Or um, a lot of us are empathetic people. So for me, I feel energy. I feel people's energy all the time. And I would be places with people and I would feel something was off and I couldn't figure out what it was that was off. And I just look around trying to like figure out which individual it was that was off. And eventually it was like just couldn't even leave the house because I was feeling things that were off. And I just went home, would just go home and stay home. But this was happening during COVID when they would say everybody needed to isolate. And then all the like my doctor and the therapist's office, they were all closed. They weren't deemed essential. So I couldn't even get help if I wanted help from them. So looking back, I don't know how I survived. I can't answer how I survived. I just did. Dove myself into work, because taking care of other people helped. But I learned that writing down my nightmares and flashbacks is how I eventually came to start remembering what happened to me as a child. And then once I started remembering what happened as a child, the nightmares started easing up. And now I very rarely have a nightmare. I still get triggered, but very seldomly do I get triggered. And now I recognize that they're a trigger and I can like breathe and I can like I can even talk myself out of it's okay, it's fine, you're all right. I can, do all the things that they teach you to ground yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful for all of that. Just going through it makes it really tough because a lot of people don't believe you. I've had people say that I'm making it up, but I was diagnosed not only with PTSD, but with something they call loss, which is later onset stress syndrome. And that actually happens a lot to veterans where they come home from war and just dive into their lives and stay busy. And then once they like reach, like retirement age or whatever, then the effects of the war hit them. And that's later onset.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me. Mine was later onset.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. Hearing you talk about the nightmares and how you didn't recall things right away is so validating for me personally, because that's the same thing that happened to me with my childhood trauma and abuse, that I didn't start processing it until I left the home. And once I got into college, that's when the nightmares started. And so you talking, I was like, oh, wow, that happened to me and it makes me feel less alone. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate as well. And it's so great to talk with other people who've had similar situations down the road, the way that their body processes the trauma. Not that I went through anything near that you did, but the way the body processes and kind of lets go, and the way that your brain starts to wake up to things. It's so nice to hear other people talk about their experiences. So you had told me off camera before we started that you were essentially still kind of spiritually, mentally in the cult until 2020, right? So that's when you really cut the cord officially.
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't until I was almost 40 where I was able to actually allow myself to say that I was in a cult. And that was around the time that my dad was dying, or we knew that his time was limited.
Yeah.
And I had realized that I had been alienated from him for a majority of my life. And then in around 2021 is when it really hit me that um, a lot of these PTSD symptoms were most likely hooked into the fact that Rama still had a lot of dark energy control of me, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that he did to hook our parents in was by doing miracles. And I don't believe there were miracles at all. I think that he just manipulated energy. And he can and if that is the case, he can still manipulate energy now by talking to somebody.
Interesting.
And by talking to somebody on the phone and saying, you call so and say this, he's still extending all of that and manipulating all that energy. So and what do you do when you're going through such hell and you want relief from it? You're going to do whatever you have to do to get relief from it. And if I was going to have to fight the devil, I was going to fight him in his realm. So I found an energy healer who was well versed in dealing with people like Rama. And I told her, I need you to get rid of all of this dark energy that he has put on me, because I'm sure that he's put some kind of curse on me. And so we did a session. The first session she did, when I was done, it felt as though somebody had uprooted something or taken something out of the pit of my soul.
Hmm.
I felt empty. It felt cavernous. It was, it felt empty on one hand, but it felt so freeing on the other. And I was exhausted. And I think I probably slept for 24 hours. I was so exhausted. But when I woke up, I knew something had changed. Something was different. And that weekend, Rama told his congregants that I was trying to put him in the grave.
Wow.
No, bud, not what I'm trying to do. But the fact that he felt it really speaks volumes for what I think's going on.
Interesting. Yeah.
He's no man of God.
And did you talk to him after that?
No, I haven't talked to him. No, this happened in 2022.
Uh-huh.
I haven't talked to him since 2012, when he told me that in order to keep a relationship with my mother, I needed to start coming back to the compound and reading the Torah. And I said, but you raised us Christian.
Yeah.
And he goes, yes, we know that, because he talks about himself in the third person. We know that. That's what we believed then.
Just switching up the whole script on everybody.
Yep. So now he doesn't believe in Jesus. And oh, so the fact that he felt that I had done this disconnect tells me everything I need to know. And it makes so much sense now how we were able to manhandle these huge pieces of sheet metal, huge pieces of of steel. We didn't use machines, we used manpower. How did we move them without anybody getting exhausted, without people getting hurt? It's because he manipulated the energy.
Okay, so you feel like there is some sort of metaphysical element at play, the way that he was able to control and manipulate things and people.
Yeah, I don't think he's a man of God at all. He's of the devil.
Whoa.
There's light and dark, and he's not of the light at all.
Right. So your beliefs now, do you fall, because you said you believe in the devil, do you fall under a Christian sort of theology?
No, 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 no. I should take that back. I don't believe in the devil.
Okay, got it.
That's something he used to say to us all the time.
Uh-huh.
He used to say to me, like, your thoughts are of the devil. Or he would say playing cards and gambling was of the devil. He would always say of the devil. Everything's of the devil. So that I'm just saying now, for anybody that's going to be watching this, Rama's of the devil. I'm just, it's like a play on words.
Okay, so where do you land now as far as your belief system? And you don't have to share if you don't want to.
I'm still figuring that out.
And that's perfectly fine and great. And it's an honest answer, and I love it.
But I'm just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you're doing now. After you disconnected emotionally, energetically, spiritually, mentally, all of the ways, and you are out,
Yeah,
you are going through therapy with a religious trauma-informed therapist, you're releasing all of this. How are you doing now?
I'm really doing great. Oh, I feel like I can take deep cleansing breaths and they don't hurt anymore. I
Hmm.
it's really great. My life is peaceful and I have a lot of things in the background that I'm working on, but um my kid first and foremost, I'm so proud of the way I raised my children. We were never taught as kids to be proud of ourselves or to give ourselves credit for anything. And I knew that I had broken through something when I was able to say I was the best mom that I needed to be and that I gave my kids everything that I was never given. And I think that if I do nothing else in my life, I I did that right. I might have put them through a divorce, but hey, lots of people go through that, right? And they're contributing members of society. They're awesome people to be around. Anybody would be lucky to get to know them. And it's all thanks to the effort that I put into them. Number two, I've been in healthcare for 25 years. I've been taking care of vulnerable people for 25 years. I love my job.
Hmm.
I'm just very thankful that I've had that medium. Um, and to top it off, in just a few days, I graduate with a degree with honors.
Wow. What degree? That's amazing.
It's a law degree, not a lawyer,
Ah,
but a law degree.
that's amazing. Congrats.
Thanks. And it took so long for me to get here because I, like I said, I always thought I was worthless, right? And I never completed anything. I went to school to be a nurse, and something came up in my personal life, and I had to stop, and I never went back. It just all fed into that narrative that I was worthless. I was never going to amount to anything. I was born with a plastic spoon. Constantly that narrative over and over and over in my life. And now in a few days, I can count on my hand how many days are left. And I get to walk across the stage with a cap and gown and it's an honors freaking degree. I'm so proud of myself.
As you should be. That's incredible. So happy for you.
And if anything, I'm taught my kids that nothing is impossible and you can do anything.
Yes.
I'm so proud of myself.
Well, I'm proud of you too. I know I just met you today, but I'm proud of you. I think that's incredible. So, what is the next step for you? What's after this degree? Do you have plans?
Well, I'm in the middle. I'm in the final edits of writing my book.
Okay.
That'll be going to publishing pretty quick here.
Great.
And I have other things going on too that I can't yet talk about, but
Okay.
there's other things.
Well, amazing. And I think it's the perfect time to say if you guys want updates on Michele, you can follow her on Facebook and we'll put the link in the description. But this has been so great. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing, for submitting, being willing to tell your story. The only thing we have left is the Linda Listen moment, sassy statement, as the viral video with the toddler goes, or something inspirational. Up to you.
When I was getting ready to graduate, I was looking through comment or things that were inspirational for me. And my most favorite one that I came up with was the quote from General Patton that said, "I don't measure a man's success by how he climbs, but how high he bounces when he hits the bottom."
Oh, interesting. I like that.
That really sums up a lot.
Yeah. How someone can bounce back after rough times, after rock bottom. That's amazing. Thank you for coming on and sharing, Michele. Do you have any other final thoughts before we go?
I think that the last thing I want to say is anybody that wants help, reach out because there's help. Any one of us that has left would be willing to help you, whether you're from the cult I'm from or any cult or any traumatic situation. We're ready to help you. We're willing to help you because we know what it's like to not have anybody.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being willing to be that because I know it can be hard. It can be re-traumatizing. It can be triggering to help people, but it sounds like you're in a really great place yourself and you're ready and willing to help, and that's amazing. So I appreciate you for being that person, being willing to be that person.
Yes, thank you so much for this platform and thanks for doing all you do because I know you came from a pretty crappy background too. So thanks for C2C.
It had its moments. There were definitely amazing moments in my childhood and there were not so amazing moments, but we have to kind of figure out a way through, and this is the way that I feel like I can give back by relating even in a small way or empathizing in a small way with people who come on and share. We all have, it's hard to put a value on trauma because it's all relative. We all have different scales or different variances of trauma, but I feel like they all kind of follow the same patterns of
Hmm.
manipulation and control and healing, and the process is generally the same. And so it's really, really great and valuable to see people tell their stories, as I mentioned earlier, and share with other people so they can feel validated as well, people who are watching. And also for people who may not have experienced anything traumatic from a high control group, but they can now sympathize or understand better someone who has left a group. And that's just all I can ever hope for with this channel.
Yeah, thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you. Well, again, this was amazing. Guys, you can reach out to her on her Facebook, link in the description. If you want to further support the channel, the best way is just interact with this post. Leave an emoji in the comment section if you'd like, or full-on comments are amazing too for our guests. They do read them. And we just appreciate any way that you can interact. And if you want to find shorter clips of our channel, we do have a sister channel, Cults to Consciousness Clips. We post 8 to 10-minute videos from our previous interviews, maybe some that may have missed and want a refresher on or want to check out. And that link is in the description as well. You can become a patron at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. We are looking into channel memberships, which are going to launch soon. I cannot speak today. And if you like this video, I'll link 2 more down here below. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.